Block 1. The abyss opens. Nihilism is not an idea. It is a wound, a silent poison seeping through the veins of civilization. To speak of nihilism is to confront the rotting foundations beneath our feet, to realize that the great monuments of truth and morality were nothing more than fragile scaffolding erected against the void. When Nietzsche declared that God is dead, it was not a triumphant proclamation. It was the tolling of a funeral bell that echoed across Europe, reverberating through every cathedral, every philosophy, every trembling soul. The abyss does not announce itself with clarity. It creeps in the form of disillusionment. A priest preaching words he no longer believes. A scientist dismantling the myths of meaning with cold equations. A citizen scrolling through endless distractions, feeling the emptiness deepen with each passing second. This is nihilism, not an abstract doctrine but the profound recognition that nothing binds us, nothing obligates us, nothing waits for us at the end of suffering. And yet, there is allure in this darkness. For to admit that there is no preordained meaning is to glimpse the possibility of freedom. The chains of tradition fall away, and the individual is left in terrifying solitude. Alone, but also unshackled. Dostoevsky saw the horror in this, warning that if there is no God, then everything becomes permitted. But perhaps Dostoevsky's terror is also an invitation. What if permission is precisely what humanity has always feared? What if the absence of divine law is not catastrophe, but the beginning of a more dangerous, more authentic life? Nihilism is the knife pressed against the throat of civilization. It can kill, or it can awaken. It strips away illusions, tearing gods from their thrones, grinding morality into dust. But in this annihilation, a question emerges. Will we sink into despair, or will we forge new fire from the ashes? To understand nihilism is to look directly into the abyss and refuse to blink. This is not comfort. It is not therapy. It is confrontation. And only through this confrontation can we begin to grasp whether nihilism is our ruin or our liberation. Block 2. The Death of God. When Nietzsche declared that God is dead, he did not mean it as metaphorical poetry. He meant that the axis of Western civilization had snapped. For 2 millennia, Europe had lived under the silent weight of the cross, its morals, its art, its laws, its very conception of truth woven into the image of a divine overseer. To kill God was to erase the compass. It was to extinguish the northern star that guided human thought. And the murder was not an act of celebration. It was the inevitability of science, skepticism, and disillusionment grinding faith into dust. The death of God leaves behind a stench. It leaves a void that howls louder than any sermon. And into that void pours despair. If there is no eternal law, no divine justice, no cosmic script, what then is the meaning of our suffering? The answer for Nietzsche was chilling. There is none. The universe is mute. Existence is indifferent. Humanity, stripped naked of illusions, stands alone before the abyss. This revelation is not progress. It is trauma. The philosophers who preached rationalism, the scientists who exalted discovery, the revolutionaries who tore down thrones, none of them foresaw the psychological cataclysm they unleashed. A civilization without God is a civilization without foundation. The cathedral collapses not only in stone, but in spirit. What remains is rubble, and the haunting suspicion that the rubble is all we have ever known. And yet, Nietzsche saw something more sinister than despair: passivity. The quiet nihilism of resignation. Men and women who, faced with the collapse of meaning, sink into comfort, mediocrity, distraction. A society anesthetized, numbing itself against the void with cheap pleasures, hollow promises, digital illusions. This is the true corpse of God, not a divine figure slain, but a humanity too weak to rise without him. Thus begins the age of nihilism, an age not defined by battles and revolutions, but by emptiness. An age where laughter masks despair, where progress disguises decay, where man wanders with no why, no where, no horizon. It is in this silence, this collapse, that the question emerges. If the old gods are gone, will we build new ones? Or will we learn, for the first time, to live without them? Block 3. Dostoevsky's Nightmare. If Nietzsche diagnosed the disease, Dostoevsky dramatized its symptoms. His novels are haunted by men who stare into the abyss of meaninglessness and cannot look away. Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, convinced that morality is an illusion, that murder might be permissible if genius demands it. Kirillov in Demons, who decides that true freedom requires suicide, that if there is no God, man becomes his own God, and therefore must claim absolute power over life and death. Ivan Karamazov in The Brothers Karamazov, who insists that if God does not exist, then all is permitted, and yet collapses under the unbearable weight of this freedom. Dostoevsky feared nihilism not as abstract philosophy, but as lived catastrophe. In Russia of the 19th century, radical youth embraced nihilism as rebellion. They tore down tradition, mocked authority, spat on morality. For them, nothing was sacred. And Dostoevsky asked, what happens to a people who believe in nothing? The answer he feared was chaos, violence, self-destruction. Yet Dostoevsky was not merely conservative, clinging to tradition for safety. His nightmare was deeper. That once God is removed, human beings would not only lose morality, but also lose themselves. For what is man without meaning? A void wrapped in flesh. A trembling animal capable of cruelty beyond imagination. His novels are confessions, warnings carved in narrative, visions of the abyss when faith evaporates. And yet, in the darkest corners of his works, Dostoevsky leaves the faintest glimmer of resistance. The belief that suffering itself might point toward redemption, that love, however fragile, might withstand the nothingness. But that hope is always fragile, always at risk of collapse under the weight of nihilism's silence. Where Nietzsche saw possibility, Dostoevsky saw danger. Where Nietzsche saw the chance to become Overman, Dostoevsky saw the risk of becoming beast. Both, however, agreed on one truth, that the death of God is not liberation alone. It is catastrophe, and the world after God is a battlefield where the soul itself is at stake. Block 4. Kafka's Labyrinth. If Nietzsche tore down the heavens and Dostoevsky trembled before the abyss, Kafka charted the prison that remains when meaning collapses. His worlds are suffocating bureaucracies, endless corridors, laws that exist without reason. In the trial, Joseph K. is accused of a crime he does not know, judged by a court that never explains itself. In the castle, the protagonist spends his life attempting to reach an authority that remains forever hidden, forever unreachable. This is nihilism not as theory, but as atmosphere, the suffocation of living in a world without exit. Kafka's genius was to show that nihilism does not always arrive as chaos. It does not need bombs or revolutions. It can arrive in the form of paperwork, procedures, rules without justification. It is the silent violence of systems that operate without meaning, stripping the individual of dignity until he is nothing more than a number, a case, a disposable object. Unlike Nietzsche's heroic challenge or Dostoevsky's moral catastrophe, Kafka's nihilism is banal. It is the hopelessness of the ordinary day, the crushing weight of a life where nothing explains itself, where every attempt at clarity is met with silence, where the universe has no answer and the offices have no doors. Here, nihilism becomes less a scream than a whisper. It is the daily erosion of purpose, the slow strangulation of the soul by absurdity. The abyss does not need to terrify when it can suffocate. And perhaps this is the most terrifying form of nihilism, because it asks nothing dramatic of us. It does not demand rebellion or despair. It simply persists, like a disease without cure, a labyrinth without exit, a silence that never breaks. Block 5. The Temptation of Nothingness. Why does nihilism attract us? Why, instead of fleeing, do so many today embrace the language of emptiness, memes of despair, slogans of meaninglessness, jokes about death? Perhaps because nothingness is strangely seductive. To believe in nothing is easier than to fight for meaning. To abandon hope is to abandon disappointment. In a world where every ideal has betrayed us, nihilism feels honest, brutally honest. This honesty is intoxicating. It frees us from false promises. The politician cannot deceive us if we already believe nothing matters. The priest cannot shame us if we have abandoned heaven. The world cannot break our heart if we no longer expect it to love us. Nihilism becomes armor, cold, heavy, but protective. Yet armor can become a tomb. To feel nothing is also to become nothing. The meme of despair, the irony of emptiness, the cultivated detachment, these may shield us, but they also hollow us. And soon, what began as defense becomes identity. We no longer wear nihilism. We are worn by it. This is the temptation of nothingness. It promises relief, but delivers paralysis. It spares us pain, but also joy. It saves us from hope, but robs us of creation. The abyss may feel safe, but it is still an abyss. Block 6. Active nihilism and the will to power. And yet, nihilism need not end in paralysis. Nietzsche urged us to distinguish between the weakness of passive nihilism and the strength of active nihilism. Passive nihilism accepts emptiness as final. Active nihilism destroys in order to create. It tears down idols not for the pleasure of wreckage, but to clear space for new temples. This is where Nietzsche's will to power emerges. Life itself, he argued, is not about survival, but about expansion, an overflowing of strength, a relentless drive to affirm existence even in its cruelty. The will to power does not seek safety. It seeks intensity. It embraces suffering not as punishment, but as fuel. In this vision, nihilism is no longer a grave, but a crucible. The challenge is brutal: to live without borrowed meaning, to create values in the desert of God's corpse. Few can bear this freedom. Most sink back into distractions, into herd morality, into numb comfort. But for those who endure, nihilism becomes a test, and overcoming it becomes the path to greatness. Here lies the paradox. The abyss, which threatens to annihilate us, is also the forge of our rebirth. To deny meaning is easy. To build meaning from nothing, that is godlike. Block 7. Abyss or liberation. So what is nihilism? A sickness or a cure? Abyss or liberation? Perhaps both. Perhaps the truth is that nihilism is a mirror, showing us what we fear most, but also what we most desire. The collapse of old values is terror, but also possibility. The silence of the universe is despair, but also freedom. To confront nihilism is to confront ourselves, our dependence on illusions, our hunger for meaning, our fear of freedom. It is the recognition that no one will save us, no one will write our destiny, no one will suffer or rejoice in our place. And perhaps that is the highest dignity, to stand alone, to stand naked, and to create. The question remains, will we sink into the void or will we climb it? Will we dissolve into irony and distraction, or will we forge a new fire from the ashes? The abyss does not decide for us. It waits, always waits. And in its silence it whispers, choose.